Why? It's a question so many have asked about the May 22nd tornado that ripped apart the city of Joplin 10 years ago. Why me? Why not me? Why did God let this happen? Why? And what if? What if I had gone home instead of going to Pizza Hut? What if we had left just 10 minutes earlier? What if we wouldn't have ignored those tornado sirens the first time we heard them? Or the second? What if? There are so many stories to tell and revisit with every anniversary that passes. So on this special edition of Newsmakers, we are focusing on Joplin's Stained Glass Theater. The theater provides a place for area residents to participate in amateur plays, and for those who belong to the theater, they consider it their ministry. When the tornado struck the theater, 2 people died instantly, and 1 passed away 8 days later. This is the story of Joplin's Stained Glass Theater, from some of those who were there that night and those who were supposed to be there. In their own words, they remember that day and remark on the theater's revival.
It was very difficult. For quite a while, I was asking, why? That's a huge question. When you're going through something like that, it's why is this? Why is that? What is this? You get over that why question, and then you get into the what if. That kept me up a lot, because you're laying there and you're playing this through your mind, second by second by second by second, and you're going, well, what if I did this? What if I did that? What if I went out the other door and saw the tornado, cleared out the building? What if? What if? What if?
It was a hot day in May. Weather forecasters issued a hazardous weather outlook on Friday, May 20th, and they continued to update residents by issuing tornado watches and eventually tornado warnings. Conditions in the atmosphere were just right for what was about to happen. And just like every storm season in the Midwest, so many people went about that day as they normally would.
Well, the day kind of started out like most other days. It was hectic and crazy, and we were getting everything together and getting the kids going and grandkids and all this other stuff to do all the stuff that we were going to do. It just seemed like just any other day. It was just a normal day. We were doing a show at the Stained Glass Theater, and it was the last night of it. It was the final, called I Remember Mama. My wife Wendy was the director, and I was a co-director and technical director and stuff like that. I did a lot of stuff in the back. But my wife and her daughter, Tracy, were the 2 that were doing most of the show.
The day started out, as always, the last day is bittersweet. You've been with people for 6 weeks and they're like family.
I moved to Iowa, and then I moved home, and everybody was home for the first time in forever. I have a little brother, and we were all home. And we decided to go camping. And so I had some obligations that Sunday at church maybe, or I just wanted to see everybody. I don't even remember. It was a crazy day because we drove my car that was still half packed with all of my belongings back to my house, and my then boyfriend, now husband, and I got into his car and we drove out of Joplin, not knowing that literally right behind us was the storm.
Near the end of the show, one of the grandkids, I was actually in the back of the theater recording it that day on my camera, and one of the grandkids came in and said that there was a tornado alarm. I went out the side door and looked towards Joplin, because that's usually up in the sky or in that direction, and it was clear. It was beautiful out. Don't worry about it, they're just testing the alarms, so don't worry about it. Went back in, and shortly after that, just like 10 minutes later, another grandkid came in and said, their alarms are still going off. So I looked outside and I was like, yeah, it's okay, don't worry about it. The show had finished, and Wendy was on stage giving the final announcements, and she had actually said that there's a storm coming in, you might get a little wet. If you want to leave, go ahead and leave, it's okay. We're going to stick around and strike the set. We're going to tear it all apart and get all the stuff off the set. And So most of the people had left, and we had quite a few cast members and family members and a few other people that were going to help us out still there. And I remember being on stage and looking at all these people, telling people where to take stuff, you know, get this stuff off the stage. And I heard somebody say, "There's a tornado." And I'm like, whatever. And I looked up, and about that time is when I saw the glass doors at the front of the building whipping back and forth, and it was pitch black, and debris was flying across it. And I'm like, oh, crap. There's a tornado, and it's here. It's on top of us.
Most of them had left. I think there was about 15 of the patrons that was still there. We decided to go ahead and start taking the set down. And I started to take my costumes to our vehicle, which my husband had brought the truck with the trailer to carry all the stuff. And I started out the front door, and as I did, I saw the biggest lightning bolt I'd ever seen in my life. And I thought, whoa, I'm not going out there. So I turned around, and before I could get back to where the chairs were, the second siren went off. And everybody began to panic because we could hear it coming. It was a noise like I've never heard before. It sounded like a jet engine. People says, you know, well, it's really loud. Well, you can't imagine until you hear it. By the time I got down to the stage, my husband was standing on the stage with a drill in one hand and a light to get everybody down in the basement.
At that point, I started pushing people off the stage and telling them to go to the basement. That's the safest place in the building. It's solid concrete down there. It's a fortress down here. This is a 100-year-old building. It's going to be safe, especially in the boiler room, is what I said. And I'm shoving people off and telling them to run, hurry, get off the stage, go. And I look up and I see somebody up in the balcony in the tech booth, and I'm going, there's no way that they're going to get down here in time. There's just absolutely no way. I remember stepping off of the stage. There's just like 2 steps there, stepping down the steps, and those 2 people that were up there were down here in front of me. And I'm like, how'd you get here? Don't worry about it, go. Just get to the basement. And I look, and everybody is just like crowding around the only entrance to the basement. And I'm going, why are you still up here? Go.
And one of the teenagers that was in the show from the bottom hollered, "The door is vacuum shut, we can't get in."
Somebody yelled back, "We can't, the door is barred." And I'm like, that's impossible. It's a very flimsy, hollow core door. I could simply push through it. How is it barred? And there's big guys down there trying to get through it. And I'm like, don't worry about it. Just fall to the floor here where you're at.
There was 15 of us in the stairwell. I was at the top. There was a stair that went then up on the stage, and I was somehow got wedged between those 2 stairs, and then it hit. Something hit me in the face and knocked me back. And I said, I've seen cartoons where they see the bright stars and stuff. Well, I actually saw them. It was crazy. Everybody just buried their face in the front of the one that's sitting in front of them. And it seemed like it lasted for an eternity.
And I jumped over a set of seats. And as soon as I did, I saw several of the windows caving in with debris and branches and things like that. So I basically shoved my head to the concrete floor, held onto a set of chairs that were actually bolted to the floor. From this point on, I remember milliseconds. Everything just slowed down so much, and you can remember so vividly every single second. It's just incredible. The sounds, the noises, the bricks actually tearing, the wood splintering, glass breaking. You can hear what sounded like a couple of freight liners or jet engines sitting right on top of you and going at fast speed, just high speed, just whine. The noise was just incredible.
Stay calm. Stay down.
Our ears were popping. You could feel the suction, and the noise was unbelievable. It sucked everything out through the basement, up through there. People were being hit. It sucked everything out of the bag that I had. I remember thinking I'm dying because I was being crushed between the stairwells and it was getting tighter and tighter. And the only thing I could think of was, well, I'm getting ready. I'm going to go home to Jesus. And I thought my husband is on the stage and he's gone.
And I remember something pushing me back and forth down the aisle. I wasn't going very far, but something would hit me and I would slide down. Something would hit me and I'd slide back and forth and back. And I remember this a couple times. Finally, I reached around and grabbed a hold of this solid steel, bench that was bolted to the floor and held on for dear life. And about that time, I felt something hit me in the back of the head. And my head bounced off the concrete floor. And I remember my glasses literally floating away from me. And I'm going to need those. So I reached out, grabbed them, folded them up. All this is still going on, and tucked them under me. Just like that. Just about that slow, too. And then I remember that this something, whatever it was, that hit me is still on my head. And it's heavy, so I started shaking it off. About that time, a cinder block rolled off of my head. A nice big cinder block. I was like, oh, that's going to leave a mark. And that's all I remember.
Joplin Stained Glass Theater was on 26th Street, less than 300 yards from St. John's Hospital. Weather experts have determined the tornado was an EF5 when it hit 26th and McClellan Boulevard, and the damage in that area was indicative of winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. Indicators like concrete parking blocks, once secured in the ground with steel rebar, had been stripped right out of the ground, vehicles tossed and smashed like they were Hot Wheels, and a hospital made of steel and concrete was left twisted and mangled.
The next thing I remember, the lights were on. I could see sky, I could see trees, I could see everything, and I'm thinking, hey, I'm outside. No, I'm inside. Hold on, where's my walls? Where's my roof? I was inside. I still am.
When it stopped, I just kind of looked around and it was unbelievable. There was nothing left of the building. The stage that my husband had been standing on was gone. And I could look right over into the stage and see all the rubble and people down there screaming and yelling. And I yelled out his name and I turned around and there he laid on the floor. He had jumped off of the stage just before it hit because he said the back doors was coming in, the roof was lifting off and he jumped off. It was carpeted where he had landed. How it happened, we'll never know, but he was laying in a bare spot. It was just the wood. The carpet was gone. He still had the drill in his hand, clutched in his hand, but it had torn the battery completely out of it. He still had the hat on his head, but he was skinned. It was horrible. His whole face, we don't know if it was shingles that hit him. It just took his skin off. And I tried to get up, and I was hurting really bad. And finally, he got up and came over, and first thing we had to get out.
When I came to and realized that I was actually inside, I looked to my left, and there was a lady that was laying on a pile of rubble, and she was dressed as one of the characters. She had the old shoes on the dress, and she was just laying there with a big sheet over her. And I was like, okay, that's not good. And about that time I heard somebody gurgling to my right. And I turned around and there was a young man. I had no idea who it was, but his face was smashed. And he was making this weird gurgling noise. And I remember thinking that he's dead. He's gonna die. He can't breathe, he can't see, he can't do anything. He's gonna die. Then after a few seconds, really, which seemed like minutes and hours almost, I heard somebody singing a gospel song. And I'm like, this is odd. This is really strange to hear this noise in this mess. And I look up and it's a friend of mine, and he's in shock. He's totally in shock, walking around, not a cut on him. He's singing gospel songs. Tried to get up and I couldn't. There was something on me, something laying on me, and it was heavy. And I asked somebody to help me out, and I saw, about that time I saw 2 or 3 people that was milling around kind of in the daze, and a couple of them came over and tried to pick some stuff off me. And finally they said, we can't, it's too heavy and there's electrical stuff in it and we're going to get shocked. We can't get it off of you. And I remember, well, I'm sure as hell not going to sit here. I'm not going to lay here and die. I want out of this. So I started rolling and fighting to get out from under it. And I heard, at one point in time, something tear, and I realized later it was my pants. Something sharp had cut through my pants and into my leg and ripped a big old gash in it. Once I finally got out from there, I still couldn't get up. My leg hurt, my arm hurt, and then I realized that those chairs that I was holding on to weren't there anymore. I was holding on to them for dear life, and they weren't there. And that's the reason why my arm hurt. Come to find out, I had ripped a couple of ligaments and chipped a bone in there too. So it was literally useless for quite a while.
We got to the campsite, we were there for maybe half an hour, and we started getting, we were under our own tornado warning. And then we started getting all the phone calls and all the eerie things started to happen.
Stations, National Weather Service has issued a tornado warning for western Jasper County until 1800 hours. National Weather Service Doppler radar indicated a tornado 10 miles west of Carl Junction or 6 miles east of Columbus, moving east at 30 miles per hour. Storm has a history of producing funnel clouds and tennis ball size hail. Time of dispatch, 1713. Maiden Lane. Did you have further?
I am in the... It's on the ground. 20 is the Maiden Lane. Looks like most of the storm, I believe, has followed around 30 seconds. Joplin's got quite a bit of damage. I'm heading that direction now. Any particular area? I know St. John's was hit, and that area where my folks live was hit real hard right there by St. John's. I'm heading that direction.
115 Dingle. Jasper to all stations, fire west. Be advised St. John's was hit in this storm.
0541. Probably going to have the worst damage around 20th and Main. We've got whole buildings missing, multiple subjects injured.
And then we started getting calls from the theater because my mom and I were supposed to be at the theater that afternoon. But we had decided last minute to do this camping trip, and Tammy Agus, who was at the theater and was supposed to have been directing the next show with us, said, don't worry about it, I'll take care of strike, we'll get everything set up for the next show. And so we got calls and we only got like parts of calls, and we got missed calls, and we got like voicemails with no calls. And so the one call that made all of our hearts just stop was this voicemail we got from Tammy. And all we heard on the voicemail was, hang on buddy, don't, and like she said some other things, and then she said, hello, the theater's gone, I don't know if you're gonna get this, but we can't get to anybody. And then it just went dead. And all of us were terrified, because no matter who she was talking to, it was somebody that we knew and loved, but we really thought it was her really young son, Luke, who she often called Buddy. It wasn't. He wasn't at the theater. It was another one of our friends, Malachi, and he had been crushed. So that was what was happening at the building. All we knew was what was in those voicemails.
Well, when we started to leave the building, I looked up and Lee Doss was in the play that day, and he's still with the theater. He's on the board, he's a trustee. Lee had his arms, said, come on, Mary, I'll help you. And I told him, I said, Lee, you always remind me of an angel every time I see you, because I think of that moment.
The gentleman that was sitting there singing, I knew him. I called him by name. I told him, hey, come here. Stand right here in front of me. And he goes, okay, Jason, whatever. And I used him as a ladder. I literally climbed up him in order to stand. And once I did, I saw the rest of it. I turned around and there was a gentleman laying on the next to the wall behind me, which wasn't really a wall anymore, but he was just staring at me, staring through me actually. That day we lost 2 people instantly, and both of them were within 5 feet of me. Quite literally, I should have been dead too.
We walked out of the theater. As we walked out, I turned around and there was one person between Wendy and I, and she was covered with blood and just staring straight ahead, and I thought, oh my.
And where was your wife?
She was sitting at the top of the stairs going to the basement, and she was literally holding on to my grandson like this, and holding on for dear life. And he got something hit in his head and put a gash in his head. The only thing I can think of is a 2x4 had hit her in the back, broke a couple of vertebrae. And I saw, there was a couple of ladies there, and they had this towel wrapped around her, or a shirt or something, and it was red, so I knew she had a head injury also. But she was saying how her back hurts, she can't move. Before I even got up, I was asking, where's the kids? Where's this person? Where's the grandkids? Where's this? And they were saying, well, they went to went to Mercy Hospital. And I looked over and saw Mercy was destroyed. It looked just like what you see in the movies. Hollywood that's a perfect Hollywood scene. Why? There's nothing there. It's destroyed. It's hollow. Literally, windows are gone. And
we walked over several bodies that now we know 2 of those were dead. We walked out of there and walked down to St. John's Hospital because it was just right down the hill. It looked like a war zone. There was cars stacked on top of each other. There was fires, everything. It was just like a war zone. We walked down around where the helicopter was, and everything was just messed up so bad. We walked into the hospital. People were just screaming and yelling and hollering for people, for their loved ones. And they got us back in there, and as we walked, I looked down and we were walking through blood and water. The insides of the building, parts were hanging down, the water was coming clear through. We were only there for, I don't know how long we were there, but it wasn't very long. And my husband just slid down the wall. He still had a screwdriver in one hand, and the drill was clutched in his other hand. I didn't know how badly he was hurt. I was in pain also because I had been crushed and I broke my ribs. There was a fireman that came in and said, "You've got to get these people out of here, there's a gas leak." Well, by the time we got out, we were the last ones, and the buses had already left.
So it was just a few of us standing there and trying to help Wendy out. And I'm standing there going, we need help. Out here in the front of the street, I see people walking up and down in a total daze, just smoking, just walking down the street. I'm like, it's not a Sunday afternoon, people. This is a tornado. We need help,
But it was a Sunday, and because the tornado hit on a Sunday, many of those who perished were in churches and other places of worship, much like the Stained Glass Theater, which so many refer to as a ministry.
We saw a couple of ambulance drive down past us to the hospital, and then a big fire truck went down there, and And then finally another one came around, and I'm sitting there flailing my arm, screaming at them, and they finally stopped, and one jumped out and came out to help us. And unfortunately, he was all by himself. He didn't have any real equipment with him, so he couldn't do anything except, just make sure that everybody's still alive, or treat medical issues right then. Unfortunately, he couldn't do anything with her because he can't pick her up or move her. He didn't have a stretcher. And we stood there for what seemed like hours. Come on, somebody, we need to move her, we need to get her to the hospital, we need to do something. And it seemed kind of bleak and hopeless. Till finally I saw some trucks pull into the parking lot, and I started yelling at some of the guys, "Hey, come on over here, come here and help me. We need to move her." And somebody said, "Well, she's got a broken back." I was like, "Grab that door. We'll use it as a bench to put her up on and take her out that way." So they grabbed the door and they scooted her onto it, which was excruciating. But we finally got her up on it, and as soon as they picked it up, I heard the door cracking because it's a hollow core door. So I told them to scoop it up and pick her up that way, and they carried her across, and I'm limping out trying to follow, and we finally get to the truck, and we get to the hospital, and they take her out and put her on a gurney, and I'm sitting there getting ready to follow, and one of the nurses looked at me point blank and says, "You need to sit down." Okay, well, that's my wife, I need to go with her. It's like, "You need to sit down now." So I did, and I finally wheeled in there, and some of the looks were just, I don't know how to put it, they were just awe. They'd stare at me like, "How are you still alive?" kind of look, and I didn't realize until later, way later on, I finally looked in the mirror and I had blood all over this and blood all down here, and I just covered in blood. And I actually remember the fireman who finally came up and helped us out. He told me to sit down too, and I'm like, "No, I'm okay. I can't sit down." After what seemed like hours again, we were sitting there forever. It started raining on us, and it was cold, and she was getting cold, and I remember yelling, "God, why? Why are you doing this to us? Why are you raining on us down? We're already beat down, and we're already hurt, we're already injured. Why are you making it even worse?" But I felt that way again at the hospital.
So we walked for 4 or 5 blocks through all of the rubble, through the buildings, the doctor's offices that had been there. And there was a couple stopped, and they said, "Get in the car, we're going to take you to the hospital," because we were a mess. I mean, we both were just covered with blood. The gentleman said, "Which hospital do you want to go to?" And my husband said, "I just want to go home," because we didn't know if Freeman was still there, because wherever you ever looked, it was gone. And we went home that day, and some of our neighbors was there, and they came over. And there were some nurses down the street, and they said, "You've got to get these people to the hospital." They kept trying to get a hold of my daughter. And in the meantime, she lived in Carl Junction, and someone put on Facebook, "Stained Glass Theater has been wiped out," and she knew I was there, and she and Mike grabbed shovels and were coming over to dig us out. Anyway, they got to 13th Street, and that's where they were stopped and couldn't go any further, and one of the texts went through to her. So she came back, and my son and his wife came over, and the nurses said, "You've got to get these people to the hospital, they're hurt bad." And they took my husband in, and they just wrapped him up. He looked like a mummy because he was so bad all over. I've never experienced a tornado or anything like that, but the things they can do is so unreal. We went in, I wanted to take my clothes off because I was wet, and I had a pair of jeans on, and my daughter-in-law, when she helped me get the jeans off, a big piece of glass fell out of my back of my jeans. There I walked all those miles, or those blocks, rode in the car, didn't have a cut back there, nothing. They checked my husband, and his neck was broken in 2 places. And then I had the broken ribs, so they put us both in the hospital.
And so we knew that the theater was gone because of that voicemail. We knew that the hospital was gone, and we assumed that Walmart was also gone, but we weren't sure about that part of town yet. And so we took off and we went to another friend's house, and they didn't have power. And it was a friend, like we were all friends, but they were also friends with the family we'd been camping with. And they were still searching the rubble for their son because they got to the Caterpillar building and it was just demolished. It was gone. So they were searching for him. We sat in this house with battery-powered lanterns and just sat shocked in the dark and kind of just stared, just waiting for someone to come through the door with some sort of news. We knew that Malachi had gone to the hospital by then. And then slowly people started trickling through the door because we had told like everybody that we met, we're going to this house, somebody come tell us, somebody bring news, this is gonna be the hub of information. So as we sat there, we waited for news. We heard that Stephen was fine. He had gone to the bathroom at the CAT building and had heard a train coming by and thought, that's really weird, there isn't a train nearby here. And you know, we all grew up in Joplin, so we all know if you hear a train and you're not near a train, it's probably a tornado. Hang on to something. And so he had just stayed in the bathroom, and he eventually made it back, and he told us in person this story, that he had stayed in the bathroom and then he just kind of waited for the sound to die down, and then eventually it kind of sounded quiet, and so he opened the bathroom door and there was nothing outside the bathroom door, so he closed the door and he just stayed there for a little while longer. And like his story, he is one of those, he just told it so straight-faced and so like nonchalant. It was hilarious, especially at the time when nothing else was funny. And so then he walked out and walked to the road and kind of got his bearings and was like, well, I know that way is Duquesne and I know that way is Joplin. So he just started walking down the road, and he eventually got picked up by a truck, and they asked him, like, are you hurt? Like, are you hurt? Are you injured? And he was like, well, I have a splinter. And he had a splinter in his finger, and that was the only injury he sustained, but he got a ride to Walmart. Well, because he was at Walmart, his family couldn't find him in the rubble. It was just madness.
As the night turned into day and the full extent of the destruction could be seen, the future seemed uncertain. Who would recover? How could they go on? It was all so overwhelming and chaotic, and the questions started creeping into their thoughts again and again.
I think there was a little bit of survivor's guilt, or maybe even just, I wish I had been there to help. But over the next few days and in serving at College Heights and going back to the theater, and I took my camera and went back to the theater and took pictures of everything. A lot of the pictures of the theater building right after were mine. There were some by the Joplin Globe that came, but a lot of them were mine off of my little point and shoot camera. I had no idea how far they would go. I have pictures. We used to sign the walls of the building, and so I went through and took pictures of all the signatures I could find, because I knew whatever was still left, there was still part of the basement was still standing, and so, but I knew, like, they're not going to keep this. Like, the building was kind of an old, rundown building. I thought I should have been there. I should have been there with them, but there was also a lot of peace in knowing that I was where I was supposed to be, and that my family was okay, and that we were there to be a support for those who weren't okay.
And what happened to Wendy?
She went into the ICU. They removed the nail and removed some of the debris off her back. They shipped her to Pittsburgh, to, at the time I think it was called Mount Carmel. And they really couldn't do a whole lot, so they air flighted her to KU Med Center in Kansas City. Unfortunately, in the 8 hours that we were at Freeman waiting for all this to transpire, they loaded up several people to go to different facilities outside the city. And I was one of the last ones, so I got stuck in Grove, Oklahoma. After the hospital, I got back to their holding area, and we couldn't find a ride back until later on. I finally made it up here, And we loaded up a van and went to Kansas City. And she was up there for a couple of days. Finally, they did the surgery for her back, got it all fixed in a cage, and she was doing pretty good. She was responsive. We were laughing and talking to people at the theater on the phone.
Wendy, I know we found out that she was in the hospital at about the same time that we found out that Malachi was in the hospital, but we weren't worried about her because her injuries didn't seem as severe as his. His for days, maybe even a week or two after he was in life-threatening, like every day was just a miracle that he was still alive. And we went to the hospital a lot. Wendy was recovering and she was gonna be okay. And so we weren't worried about her until all of a sudden she got really, really sick from an infection.
One night I was sitting there watching, just watching her, like I did a lot, because I couldn't sleep. Every time I laid down on this side, this leg hurt. Every time I laid down on this side, this arm hurt. If I laid on my back, my head hurt. So I was sitting there watching her, and all of a sudden, all these gauges and monitors and everything started going in different directions. And I'm going, well, that's probably not supposed to happen. And apparently a doctor was there and he saw it, but he came in and I looked at him and I said, is that supposed to be like that? And she goes, no. And pushed me out of the office, or out of the room, and like, I don't know where they all came from. They were like mice. They just all scurried in all at once, and they worked on her for quite a while, and they couldn't get her out of that defib for quite a while. Finally, they got her heart regulated, and and I'm just in awe sitting there watching this. And the next day, they said that she was brain dead. We were all like, why? She was doing great. She was doing good. Why did she die? What happened? And they tested her blood and said it was septic. Something in that nail they didn't catch. Something in that, in the issues. Because we were thinking that the surgery for the back caused this. And it's like, no, it was septic. It was sepsis.
It was hard. I'd worked with her a lot. I loved her and her family. And that was really hard. And the audience member that had been there, we knew him, and we were sad to hear that he had passed away. And I remember Wendy's loss was a huge loss to our theater. Nothing was ever quite the same after she left. But I also know without a shadow of doubt that she isn't here, but she's not gone forever, that we're gonna get to see her again. She's where she's supposed to be. She didn't have to suffer through any more of the recovery. She didn't have to suffer through any more of her illness. And while we miss her, I find myself telling these stories with this smile on my face that makes no sense. But I know where they are, and I know that those have passed away since then. Tammy and Tom and all of these amazing people, and Dee Dee, they have all gone to where they're supposed to be.
And it got to the point where I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. I found some remorse in a bottle of rum, and I drank myself silly for about a year, and one day I was like, well, this is just absolutely stupid. I'm not fixing anything, I'm not curing anything, I'm actually hurting the rest of the people around me. I'm avoiding things that I need to be addressing. I need to do something, and I can't do it with a glass in my hand. I changed, set it aside, and started working on some other skills that I had. Got back into working, which was a big thing for me at the time. So, and then I started going to church more, participating more, and I still had that question of why. but it wasn't something that I needed to have answered. The question's always going to be there. Why? What if? What if I had done this? What if it still is there in the back of my mind.
I thought, Lord, why did you keep us? I know there's a reason. God uses me in the ministry. I work at the church, and I guess He needed me around to help. I play the piano, and and I'm active at the church. But I think one of the things is the theater. My husband was talking the other day, and he said, sometimes you act like the church or the theater is a church to you. And I said, well, it really is, because there's so much love and so much compassion. I had a knee replacement 2 years ago, and for 14 days, a different family brought us our meal from the theater.
I just started serving on the board in December, and it was always a dream of mine. I watched my parents serve on the board. I watched all these fabulous people serve on the board, and I always thought, that's where it's at. That's where I'm gonna be someday. Like, those people, they get to make decisions, and I wanna be one of those people to make decisions, especially now as I serve on the board. I can just feel them cheering us all on, because the Bible talks about how those who have served before us, who have run the race and completed the race, they join this great cloud of witnesses. So they're up there with like Paul and Peter and all these people, and they just get to watch in the stands as we continue the race and continue the marathon. And that brings such joy, because they were here cheering me on just a few years ago, and they've never stopped. And I love that. And I love that about our theater family. And I love that as the board sat around a table just a few weeks ago and sat around and decided, it's time to move again. It wasn't without pause to think about everything that has brought us to this point, because the board before us survived the tornado. There's still members of our board who were in the theater building when it went down, and their stories are incredible. Just the hand of God over every little thing. And for a long time, it was really hard to say things like that, because how can death be part of God's hand? But it is. And the longer I run the race, the more I understand how true it is, and how peaceful it is, and how joyful it is that they do get to join that cloud that just gets to cheer us on, because that's all they ever wanted to do in the first place, was just cheer us on and watch these. I know I'm one of those kids that they raised, and I know that they're watching, and they're like, yeah, I passed this on to you. You learned from me. And they're proud of their work, and they're proud of any work that we do. But I also know that among those numbers are Tammy and Tom, and they were among the people who were in the theater building when it went down, and they were on the board of directors as they chose what to do next. And we had this nomadic period as a theater, and banded together and traveled all over God's green earth to just keep performing together. And that sounds really weird, maybe, to people who are not theater lovers, people who love to perform. But the theater is so much more than performance arts. Backstage, behind the scenes, what our audience feels but maybe doesn't see is that we are truly a family, and we're a family who's been through enormous joy and enormous hardships together. They brought us to the building we're in now, and I remember when they got to announce that, and we were all so excited just to have a home base again, a place that we could all gather, because after the tornado, we all understood that having a place to call our own was important, and having a place where we knew we could gather, even if it was in rubble, and we knew we would find each other there, was so important. Because when major life tragedies happen, cell service goes down, apparently, and technology fails, and we have to physically find each other. And especially those people like Tammy and Tom and Wendy who served on the board. I know without a shadow of a doubt that I'll get to see them again.
But it's a matter of, okay, eventually I'll know. One of these days I will know why. One of these days I'll know why God made mosquitoes. One of these days I'll know why, there's so many questions. And you just have to have faith that one day you'll know. You don't need to know all the questions answered right now. And that's a big thing. That's what got me through it.